They say the Stone King's heart didn't just break 7 years ago. It shattered into shards of obsidian. Since the night his betrothed turned a wedding toast into a death sentence, Alexander Arnold has ruled his court with a coldness that rivals the deepest winter. Pack princesses and highborn ladies are nothing but shadows to him, ghosts of a future he burned to the ground. He is a man who has forgotten how to bleed, surrounded by a court that fears his silence more than his sword. But the prophecy never said a queen would take his hand. It said a girl from the streets would reset his world. And she just walked through the gates. But on an autumn evening beneath a hunter's moon, he nearly trampled a servant girl kneeling in his rose garden. "Your Majesty should watch where he's walking," the girl said, standing and brushing dirt from her simple dress. "Even kings can crush things that are trying to grow." She'd spoken to him, to the Alpha King, without permission, without fear, without even lowering her eyes. He stood there in the moonlight, ready to summon his guards and have this insolent maid removed from the palace grounds. No one, absolutely no one, had dared address him so directly in years. But then he saw her. Amber, a wolfless omega with hazel eyes and dirt under her fingernails, kneeling among the roses like she belonged to the earth itself. One look. That's all it took for 7 years of ice to crack down the middle. She didn't recognize him in the shadows. She didn't bow or tremble. And that made him feel something he thought was dead forever. If you're already hooked on this werewolf romance, stay with me. We're about to dive into Amber and Alexander's impossible love story, where an Alpha King risks everything for a woman his kingdom says he can never have. Before we continue, I've noticed that many of you enjoy watching my videos but haven't subscribed yet. Please help support and grow this channel by liking the video, dropping a comment, and subscribing if you enjoy the stories. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the story. Amber had exactly 12 silver coins to her name, a dying brother, and a pride that wouldn't let her beg. "Excuse me, miss," she called softly to a passing lady-in-waiting. "Have you finished with that tea tray? I can take it to the kitchens for you." The woman looked through her as if she were invisible. That was fine. Amber was used to being invisible. At 23, this wasn't where she'd imagined her life would lead. 3 years ago, she'd lived with her family in the Riverside Pack, studying herbs and healing with her mother. Then she turned 16 and waited for her first shift during the awakening moon. It never came. No wolf. No transformation. No future. Wolfless omegas didn't get to stay in pack territories. They brought shame, bad luck, whispers that their blood was tainted. So Amber and her younger brother Marcus were cast out, left to survive in the human settlements that bordered the kingdom. When Marcus fell ill with silver fever, a disease that only affected those with wolf blood, cruelly ironic for a boy whose sister had none, Amber took the only job available to someone with her status. Palace maid. Lowest rank. Invisible girl in the house of the most powerful werewolf in the realm. "You there?" A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Amber turned to find Margot, the head housekeeper, glaring at her with unconcealed contempt. Behind the older woman stood 2 palace guards, their expressions blank, but their posture suggesting she was in trouble. "You've been assigned to the night gardens," Margot said, her tone making it clear this was a punishment, not an opportunity. "His Majesty has complained about the state of the roses. You'll tend them until they meet his standards." Amber's stomach dropped. The night gardens meant working alone after dark, when the palace was empty and dangerous. It meant being vulnerable in a place where wolfless servants had disappeared before. But the night gardens also paid double wages for the isolation and risk. Marcus needed medicine. The apothecary wouldn't extend credit anymore. "Yes, ma'am," Amber said quietly, keeping her eyes down. "When do I start?" "Tonight." Margot's smile was cruel. Let's see if you last the week. That evening, as the autumn sun bled red across the western towers, Amber made her way through the marble corridors toward the gardens. She carried pruning shears, work gloves that didn't fit, and a lantern that barely held enough oil for 2 hours. The gardens were beautiful in the dying light, roses in deep crimson and pure white, climbing trellises that reached toward the darkening sky. She'd always loved roses. They had thorns but bloomed anyway. She knelt among the flower beds and began her work, her hands gentle despite her exhaustion. This was the one place in the palace where she didn't feel completely worthless. Plants didn't care if you had a wolf. They grew for anyone who tended them with care. Even kings can crush things that are trying to grow. The words left her mouth before she realized someone was there, a tall figure standing in the shadows near the marble fountain, watching her. Amber's heart stopped. She knew that silhouette. Every servant in the palace knew it. The broad shoulders, the commanding presence, the absolute stillness of a predator deciding whether to strike. The Alpha King himself. In her garden, watching her. After she'd just scolded him like an equal, she scrambled to her feet, dropping her shears, her mind racing through apologies and prayers that her death would be quick. Your Majesty, I didn't mean, please, I didn't know it was. You didn't recognize me, he said, his voice deep and measured, almost curious. It wasn't a question. Amber's mouth went dry. She should run. She should beg. She should do something other than stand there trembling while the most powerful werewolf in the kingdom studied her like she was a puzzle he'd never encountered before. I've been coming to these gardens for 7 years, Alexander continued, taking a step closer. The moonlight caught his face now, sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to see straight through her, and something else. Something that looked almost like surprise. No one has ever spoken to me the way you just did. I'm sorry, Amber whispered. I'll accept whatever punishment. Why don't you have a wolf? The question hit her like a physical blow. She flinched, her hands instinctively wrapping around herself as if she could hold together the broken pieces. I don't know, Your Majesty, she managed. I just don't. He was close enough now that she could see the wolf tattoo on his neck, the mark of an alpha's beast living just beneath his skin. Close enough that she could smell cedar and night air and something wild that made her human instinct scream that she was prey standing before a predator. But he wasn't looking at her with disgust. He wasn't looking at her the way everyone else did, like she was defective, shameful, less than nothing. He was looking at her like she was the first real thing he'd seen in years. What's your name? He asked quietly. Amber, Your Majesty. Amber, he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it. You tend these roses every night? Starting tonight, yes. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in that famous stone facade. For just a moment, she saw not the Alpha King, but a man who looked profoundly, devastatingly lonely. Then I suppose, he said, I'll be spending more time in my gardens. He turned and walked back toward the palace, leaving Amber standing alone among the roses, her heart pounding, her entire world tilting on its axis. She didn't know it yet, but in that moment, everything had changed. The Stone King had felt his dead heart remember how to beat. And the wolfless Omega girl had just become the most dangerous person in the kingdom. The autumn moon hung fat and golden over Silvercrest Palace, casting long shadows across the rose garden where Amber worked alone. This was her favorite time, the hours after midnight when the other servants were sleeping, when she didn't have to endure their whispers and sideways glances. Wolfless. Broken. Cursed. She'd heard every variation of contempt that existed in their vocabulary. Her fingers moved carefully through the thorny stems, pruning away the dead blooms, encouraging new growth. The roses didn't care that she had no wolf. They bloomed for her just the same. You talked to them. Amber gasped and spun around, her shears clattering to the stone path. A man stood near the fountain, half hidden in shadow. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in simple dark clothing that told her nothing about his rank. But something about the way he held himself, that absolute stillness, made her instinctively nervous. I didn't mean to startle you, he said, stepping closer. The moonlight caught his face now. Strong jaw, dark eyes that seemed to carry the weight of years, and an expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger. Something else. Something like loneliness. You shouldn't be out here, Amber said, then immediately regretted the words. Who was she to tell anyone where they should or shouldn't be? I mean, it's late. Most people are sleeping. I don't sleep much anymore. He moved to the rose bush she'd been tending, his fingers brushing against a bloom. Why do you talk to them? Because they listen without judging. The honesty surprised her. She never spoke this openly, not even to Marcus. They don't care what you are or what you're missing. They just exist. And if you're gentle with them, they bloom. Something shifted in his expression. The hardness softened, just for a moment. And if you're not gentle, then they die. Or they grow thorns so thick nothing can touch them without bleeding. He studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You're very wise for a palace maid. I'm not wise. I just know plants better than people. She paused, tilting her head. You seem sad. Are you one of the guards? I haven't seen you before. A strange sound escaped him. Not quite a laugh, but close. No one has asked me if I'm sad in a very long time. Well, you are. I can see it in your eyes. Like you've lost something you can't get back. Perhaps I have. He was close enough now that she could see the wolf tattoo on his neck, the mark of an alpha. Her stomach dropped. Not a guard then. Someone important. Someone she shouldn't be speaking to so casually. I should go, she said quickly, bending to retrieve her shears. I've disturbed you. You haven't. His voice stopped her. You're the first person in 7 years who's spoken to me like I'm human. Amber straightened slowly, confusion warring with a strange flutter in her chest. I don't understand. I know you don't. He smiled then, and it was devastating, sad and genuine, and entirely unexpected. I'm Alexander. Alexander Arnold. The name hit her like ice water. The Alpha King. She'd been talking to the Alpha King like he was just some melancholy stranger in the garden. Horror flooded through her, followed immediately by panic. Your Majesty. She dropped into a clumsy bow, her whole body trembling. I'm so sorry. I should never have. Don't. The word was sharp enough to freeze her in place. When she dared look up, his expression had shifted back to that careful blankness. The moment of warmth was gone, locked away behind stone walls. Go. Before someone sees you here with me. Amber ran. She gathered her tools with shaking hands and fled through the garden paths, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Behind her, she felt his gaze following her into the darkness. She didn't look back. But in his private chambers an hour later, Alexander stood at his window overlooking the gardens, unable to stop replaying their conversation. The girl who talked to roses. The girl who'd seen his sadness without fear. The girl who'd treated him like a person instead of a throne. For the first time in 7 years, the Stone King wanted something he couldn't command into existence. He wanted her to look at him that way again. Alexander told himself he was simply ensuring the palace was properly maintained. That's why he found himself in the East Corridor at dawn, watching Amber scrub floors with methodical precision. That's why he took his breakfast in the smaller dining hall instead of his chambers, because she served there on Thursdays. That's why he walked through the gardens every evening, hoping to find her among the roses again. He was fooling no one, least of all himself. The palace staff noticed within days. Whispers followed Amber like shadows. The Wolfless maid who'd caught the Stone King's eye. Some pitied her. Most despised her. Kitchen maids accidentally spilled scalding water near her feet. Laundry servants mixed lye into her work gloves, burning her hands. Her meager belongings disappeared from her quarters, then reappeared destroyed. Amber endured it all in silence, keeping her head down, refusing to even glance at the king when he passed. She understood the rules of survival. Acknowledge his attention, and she'd be destroyed. The gap between an alpha king and a wolfless omega wasn't just vast, it was insurmountable. But Alexander's patience was wearing thin for entirely different reasons. Lord Reginald had convened the High Council 3 times in as many weeks, each meeting more insistent than the last. "My reasoning is my own," he said coldly. "This discussion is closed." He left them sitting in stunned silence. That night, he found Amber in the servants' quarters, her hands wrapped in bandages from the live burns. She looked up when his shadow fell across her doorway, and he saw fear flash across her face. "Walk with me," he said quietly. "Your Majesty, I can't." That wasn't a request. She followed him through the empty corridors to his private study, her steps hesitant. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than he intended. "I'm offering you a position as my personal attendant. You'll tend my chambers, serve my meals, manage my schedule. The salary is 50 silver crowns a month." Amber's eyes widened. 50 crowns. That was more than she made in half a year. That could pay for Marcus's medicine for months, maybe even see him through the winter. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I can't watch you suffer in silence anymore." The honesty surprised them both. "And because I want you near me. I won't apologize for that." She should refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But Marcus was coughing blood now, and the apothecary wouldn't extend more credit, and she was so tired of being powerless. "I accept," she said, her voice barely audible. Alexander's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes blazed to life. "Then you start tomorrow." As she left his study, Amber wondered if she'd just saved her brother's life or signed away her own. The first week, they barely spoke beyond necessity. Amber served his meals, pressed his formal wear, kept his chambers immaculate. She moved through his space like a ghost, careful never to linger, never to presume. But Alexander had always been patient when hunting. "You're afraid of me," he said one evening as she poured his wine. "I'm afraid of what being near you will cost me," she corrected quietly. The honesty stopped him. Most people lied to kings. She simply told uncomfortable truths. By the second week, they talked. Small things at first. The weather, the roses, Marcus's improving health now that she could afford his medicine. But conversations have a way of deepening in the dark hours before dawn, when two lonely people find themselves in the same room. "Why don't you trust anyone?" Amber asked one night, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Alexander was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because the woman I loved tried to kill me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Amber set down the book she'd been shelving and turned to face him. "Lady Catherine," he continued, his voice hollow. "My betrothed. We were to be married, unite the Central Pacts, bring peace to the kingdom. I loved her. Or I thought I did." His jaw tightened. The Northern Pack wanted war. She wanted power. During our wedding feast, she poisoned my wine herself. Smiled at me while I drank it. "How did you survive?" My beta noticed her hand trembling. Knocked the goblet away before I'd swallowed enough to kill me. But I swallowed enough to feel myself dying. His dark eyes met hers. You can't trust anyone after that. Not completely. Not ever. I'm sorry, Amber whispered and meant it. What about you? Why do you carry shame like a second skin? She flinched, but he'd shared his wound, and somehow that made it easier to show her own. I was born wolfless. My parents tried to hide it, pretended my wolf was just dormant. But when I turned 16 and didn't shift during the awakening moon, there was no hiding anymore. Her voice cracked. The pack elders said I was cursed, that my presence would bring misfortune. They exiled Marcus with me because he refused to stay without his sister. They punished a child for your loyalty. They punished us both for my defect. You're not defective. The intensity in his voice startled her. You're the strongest person in this palace. Before she could respond, thunder cracked overhead like the sky splitting open. The storm had been building all evening, but now it unleashed with savage fury. Lightning illuminated the windows in blinding flashes. Rain hammered against stone. Amber gasped, her whole body trembling. Without a wolf, storms felt different. No animal instincts to ground her, just raw human terror of nature's violence. Amber. Alexander was beside her suddenly, his hands on her shoulders. Look at me. I don't. Her breathing came too fast, panic clawing up her throat. He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like a shield. You're safe. I have you. She buried her face in his shirt, fingers clutching the fabric like a lifeline. He held her through the worst of the storm, his heartbeat steady against her ear, his hand stroking her hair with surprising gentleness. When she finally lifted her head, dawn was breaking. They were still tangled together on the floor of his study. His eyes met hers, and something shifted, something irrevocable. Alexander, she breathed. He kissed her like a man drowning, like she was air itself. Not gentle, not careful, but desperate and aching and so full of needed hurt. She kissed him back with equal hunger, 7 years of his loneliness meeting a lifetime of hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, they knew nothing would ever be the same. The grand hall glittered with crystal and candlelight, filled with the most powerful werewolves in the kingdom. The High Council had orchestrated this banquet with surgical precision, a parade of eligible she-wolves, each more beautiful and connected than the last, all vying for the Stone King's attention. Lady Helena of Blackthorn was the crown jewel among them. Raven-haired, sharp-eyed, draped in emerald silk that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. She sat 3 seats from Alexander, her smile calculated, her posture perfect. Every inch the queen the council wanted. Alexander felt nothing. He made polite conversation, nodded at appropriate moments, played the role of considerate host. But his attention kept drifting to the shadows along the walls, where servants moved like ghosts refilling wine and clearing plates. Then he saw her, Amber, dressed in simple servant's black, carrying a wine decanter with careful hands. She kept her eyes down, invisible as always. But he saw her. He always saw her. Something inside him snapped. You there, he said, his voice cutting through the dinner conversation. The hall quieted. Come here. Amber froze. Every eye in the room turned to watch as she approached the high table, her steps uncertain, confusion and fear warring on her face. Your Majesty, she whispered when she reached him. Alexander stood, and the entire hall fell silent. He pulled out the empty chair beside his own, the seat reserved for his queen. Sit. I can't. Sit, Amber. The use of her name sent shockwaves through the room. She sat because disobeying the king in front of the entire council would be worse than whatever punishment awaited her for this humiliation. Alexander turned to face the assembled nobles, his expression carved from ice. This is Amber. She is the woman who holds my regard. You'll treat her accordingly. The hall erupted. Gasps, whispers, Lady Helena's face twisting with rage. Lord Reginald half rose from his seat, sputtering protests. But Alexander's cold stare silenced them all. Amber couldn't breathe. The weight of their judgment crushed her from all sides. Wolfless. Servant. Abomination sitting at the high table. She ran. Through the corridors, past shocked servants, into her tiny room where she pressed her back against the door and tried not to fall apart completely. What had he done? What had he done to both of them? The door opened despite her weight against it. Alexander filled the doorway, his formal coat already discarded, his eyes burning with something fierce and desperate. Why? She demanded, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do that to me? Because I'm tired of pretending you don't matter. He crossed to her in 2 strides, his hands framing her face. Because every moment I spend watching you from across rooms is torture. Because I thought I was dead inside until you looked at me like I was worth saving. Alexander, I don't care about the council. I don't care about scandal or bloodlines or any of it. His thumb brushed away her tears. I only care about you. She kissed him first this time, pulling him down to her with desperate hands. There was no gentleness now, no careful boundaries. They shed clothes like armor, their bodies coming together with raw hunger and tender reverence in equal measure. He made love to her on her narrow bed, claiming her completely, and she claimed him right back. When he moved inside her, she saw stars. When he whispered her name like a prayer, she understood what it meant to be wanted not despite what she was, but because of it. Afterward, tangled in her thin sheets, his fingers tracing patterns on her skin, Alexander knew he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. He'd just made a wolfless Omega the most important person in his kingdom. And he'd do it again without hesitation. The emergency council meeting convened at dawn, barely 12 hours after the banquet. Lord Reginald stood at the head of the table, his face carved from righteous indignation. Your Majesty, this cannot stand. A wolfless Omega has no place beside the Alpha King, the very foundation of our society. Careful, Reginald. Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. You're very close to overstepping. Then let us overstep. Another counselor slammed his fist on the table. We demand this relationship end immediately. If you refuse, we will call a vote of no confidence. The kingdom cannot be led by a king who places personal desire above duty. Alexander rose slowly, his presence filling the room like gathering storm clouds. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute power. You presume to make demands of me? To threaten your king? His eyes went cold as winter frost. I could dissolve this council with a word. Every one of you serves at my pleasure. Perhaps you've forgotten what happens when an alpha is pushed too far. The counselors paled, suddenly remembering the beast beneath the crown. The Stone King had earned his throne through blood and dominance, not birthright alone. Before anyone could respond, the doors burst open. Alpha Thorn of Blackthorn strode in, his daughter Helena at his side. He was a massive man, scarred and brutal, power radiating from him like heat from a forge. I've come to simplify your decision, Arnold. Thorn's voice rumbled through the chamber. Marry my daughter within the month, or Blackthorn withdraws from all treaties. Our trade routes close. Our military support ends. And every pack allied with us follows suit. You're threatening war, Alexander said flatly. I'm offering you a choice. Your kingdom's stability, or a wolfless bed warmer. Thorn smiled without warmth. Choose wisely. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Alexander left before he did something he couldn't take back, his control hanging by threads. He found Amber in his chambers, her face pale, her hands shaking as she folded linens with mechanical precision. She'd heard everything. Servants always did. "You should accept," she said without looking at him. "Marry Lady Helena. Secure your kingdom."
No.
"Alexander, they'll destroy you. Everything you've built. I don't care." He crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. "Do you understand? I don't care about any of it without you." But Amber understood something he didn't. Love wasn't enough when kingdoms were at stake. She'd already lost one family to her wolfless shame. She wouldn't let Alexander lose everything for the same reason. That night, while he slept beside her for what she knew would be the last time, Amber memorized the feel of his arms around her, the sound of his heartbeat, the way he whispered her name in his dreams. At dawn, she kissed his forehead gently and slipped from his bed. She took nothing but her cloak and the small bag of coins she'd saved, enough to get Marcus out of the capital, far from the storm she'd brought down on the palace. She left no note. What could she possibly say? That she loved him too much to watch him destroy himself for her? The palace gates stood unguarded in the pre-dawn darkness. Amber walked through them without looking back, her heart breaking with every step. She didn't know that Blackthorn soldiers were waiting in the forest. She didn't know that leaving Alexander was exactly what his enemies wanted. Amber made it 3 miles into the forest before the soldiers emerged from the shadows. She ran, but human legs couldn't outpace wolves. They circled her like predators toying with prey, their eyes gleaming in the pre-dawn darkness. When she tried to scream, a hand clamped over her mouth. The silver chains burned like liquid fire against her skin. Without a wolf's healing, the pain was unbearable, flesh blistering, blood seeping through the metal links. She bit back screams as they dragged her through the forest, every movement agony. Blackthorn keep rose from the mountains like a scar against the sky. They threw her into a stone cell, the silver chains still binding her wrists and ankles. Hours passed, maybe days. Pain made time meaningless. When the cell door finally opened, Lady Helena stood in the doorway, beautiful and cold as winter itself. "You should have stayed invisible," Helena said, crouching beside Amber's broken form. "Now your leverage." She held up a parchment. "My father is sending this to your king. Marry me within 3 days and publicly renounce his obsession with a wolfless whore, or you die at dawn. Executed as a traitor who seduced the crown for personal gain." "He won't choose me," Amber whispered through cracked lips. "He'll choose his kingdom." "I certainly hope so." Helena smiled. "Because if he comes for you, my father will kill him." The message reached Alexander at midday. He read it once, his face expressionless. Then he crumpled the parchment in his fist, his control finally shattering. "Assemble the guard," he said, his voice barely recognizing as human. "Everyone's still loyal to their king. We ride in 1 hour." His beta stepped forward carefully. "Your Majesty, this could be a trap." "I don't care." Alexander's eyes had gone wolf-bright, his beast clawing to the surface. "They took her. They hurt her. I will burn Blackthorn to ash." The assault came at midnight beneath a blood-red moon. Alexander led 50 of his most brutal warriors through Blackthorn territory, and when the enemy guards tried to stop them, the Stone King showed them why they should have feared him all along. He shifted mid-stride, his massive wolf form tearing through the front lines with savage efficiency. His claws ripped through armor like paper. His jaws crushed bone. Blood sprayed across ancient stone as he carved a path toward the keep, and his own men watched in terrified awe. This wasn't the controlled king they served. This was the predator beneath the crown, unleashed and unstoppable. Alpha Thorn himself tried to block the entrance, shifting into his own wolf form. The two alphas collided in an explosion of fur and fury, fangs snapping, claws gouging. But Alexander fought with something Thorn didn't have: desperate, all-consuming love turned into weapon. When Thorn's throat tore open beneath Alexander's jaws, the remaining Blackthorn soldiers scattered. Alexander shifted back to human form, blood-soaked and breathing hard, and kicked down every door between him and the dungeons. He found her chained in darkness, her wrists burned raw, her face pale as death. When she looked up and saw him standing there, covered in blood, eyes still glowing wolf-bright, absolutely feral, she started crying. "I've got you," Alexander said, his voice breaking as he tore the silver chains apart with his bare hands, his own skin burning from the contact. "I've got you, love. You're safe now." He lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest as he carried her out of hell. Behind them, Blackthorn Keep burned. The ride back to Silvercrest took 3 days. Alexander held Amber the entire time, refusing to let anyone else touch her while the royal physician treated her burns. She drifted in and out of consciousness, and every time she woke, he was there, solid, real, impossibly hers. "You came for me," she whispered on the second night. "I will always come for you." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Always." When they reached the palace, the High Council was waiting. Lord Reginald stood at the front, his face carved from disapproval and barely concealed rage. "Your Majesty, the Blackthorn Alliance is destroyed. Their alpha is dead. We are on the brink of—" "I don't care." Alexander's voice cut through the throne room like a blade. Amber stood beside him now, still weak, but refusing to hide. "Convene the full court. I'm making a proclamation." Within the hour, every noble in the capital had gathered. Alexander stood before them with Amber at his side, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute authority. Effective immediately, all laws discriminating against wolfless individuals are abolished. They will have the same rights, protections, and opportunities as any wolf-blooded citizen of this kingdom. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. "Furthermore, I announce my intention to take Amber as my queen and mate." Lord Reginald's face turned purple. "This is madness. A wolfless queen violates every tradition. She has more strength in her human heart than most have in their wolf souls," Alexander said coldly. "She survived torture meant to break her. She sacrificed everything to protect this kingdom, even when it showed her nothing but cruelty. If that doesn't make her worthy of a crown, then the crown itself is worthless." "I resign," Reginald spat, tearing off his council medallion. "I will not serve under this abomination." 3 other councillors followed him out. But younger voices rose to fill the silence, progressive nobles who'd quietly opposed the old ways, waiting for someone brave enough to challenge them. Amber's coronation was held a week later. No grand ceremony, no elaborate gowns. She wore simple white and stood before the kingdom not as something she wasn't, but exactly as she was, human, scarred, unbroken. When Alexander placed the crown on her head, she didn't bow beneath its weight. She stood tall. That night in their chambers, he presented her with a scroll sealed in gold. "Your wedding gift," he said softly. She unrolled it with trembling hands. A royal decree establishing sanctuaries for wolfless individuals in every major city. Medical care, job training, protection under law. And at the bottom, the first name on the beneficiary list, Marcus. "Your brother will receive the best care in the kingdom," Alexander murmured against her hair. "And every wolfless person after him will know they have a queen who understands their struggle." Amber turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "You've changed everything." "No, love." He kissed her softly, reverently. "We changed everything. Together." Outside their windows, dawn broke over Silvercrest, a new day for a kingdom learning that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act was choosing love over tradition. The Stone King had found his heart again, and the Wolfless Queen had found her voice. Together, they would reshape the world. If you enjoyed this story, comment, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves unexpected endings. Your support truly means the world to me and helps this channel grow. Thank you for being here.